Am I mic'd? Can everybody hear me okay? So thank you for being here. I am here tonight. Actually, I'm not exactly sure why I'm here tonight. No, I have years of profound experience that I'm not going to talk about because we have four great panelists here to share their experience with you. I thought I would start, just for a little background, I do work at a newspaper now, but I did begin my career in book publishing. My very first job was at St. Martin's Press as a publicity assistant. I did that for 1 year, and then I ran away to graduate school because the job was inside in an office, and I didn't want to be in an office. So, long story short, I ended up being a freelance writer as well, so I have lots of experience with rejection and persistence, and then I ended up inside the New York Times, eventually as an editor. So I have the experience of issuing a lot of rejections. Not my favorite thing, but it needs to be done. Anyway, I think this is really great because we have a great mix of people here. We have an editor, we have a novelist, we have an agent, and we have someone in charge of hiring and personnel in a big publishing house. So I think you're going to get a good mix of wisdom here. So one of the things I realize when I talk to people about my work is that I often assume that other people know the sort of basic details of what I do. So I want to start by going down and asking everybody one painfully obvious question, or one question that might feel like it's very obvious to you. And then just sort of go from there and talk a little bit about how you all got into what you did. But my first obvious question, maybe, is so you run an imprint at a large publishing house. What is an imprint, and what's the purpose of having one within the publishing house?
So an imprint is a division within a publishing house, and each imprint has a personality. So Fodor's, as some of us may recall, was the travel imprint of Random House. Some imprints do literary fiction or cookbooks. So it's the personality within, and all the big five publishing houses have several imprints within each house, and they each have a distinct personality. They're either commercial and they do a lot of celebrity books, or they do diet books or how-to lifestyle books. My particular imprint focuses on what I would call kind of literary fiction, history, memoir, and narrative nonfiction.
What is the meaning of 37 Inc.?
So you have to name an imprint something. It turns out everything that you try to name it has been taken. And I was trying to, I publish a lot of people kind of who've hitherto been in the margins, and their voices, I want to bring them to the center. And I was thinking a lot about borders and what defines a border. And it turns out the 37th parallel north goes through three of my favorite places: California, where I'm from; Africa, where I think we're all from at some point; and then Italy, where, I just figure if you don't love Italy, there's probably something that this seminar is not going to fix. But my maternal grandmother's also from Italy, so there you go.
See, that's such a cool bit of information. I never would have known that. That you looked that closely at a map before you.
I figured that.
That's
I
excellent.
reverse engineered it.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. All right. I have everybody in the wrong order here. Emma.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So you have two roles here. You're both a novelist and a bookstore owner. So the painfully obvious question I want to ask you is, if you were a successful novelist, what made you want to open a bookstore? I imagine it involves lots of non-literary things like accounting, stocking shelves, cleaning the windows of the front of the store.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I'm starting with you.
You're not the first person to ask me that. So what happened was I worked as a bookseller for a number of years at a bookstore called Book Court that was in Cobble Hill. And then I was very pregnant with my second child, and my husband and I moved closer to Book Court because where we were living, just elsewhere in Brooklyn, I was too far away from a bookstore, and I was just having one of those 8-month pregnant meltdowns where I was like, I need to be able to walk to a bookstore. This is non-negotiable. So we moved like a few blocks away from Book Court, and then we found out from the owners that they were closing.
No.
And it was as clear as day to me that I had two choices, and the choices were to move again or to open a bookstore. And I couldn't move again. And so I opened a bookstore.
Okay. All right.
That's my really
And
honest answer.
It's working out well for you.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
going okay.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So next is our agent, Alexandra Machinist. I warned her that this isn't really an obvious question. I warned her that I was going to ask her about her unbelievably cool last name. If I could start quickly with that, and then you can tell us the basic role of an agent as a middle person between writers starting out and editors working at publishing houses.
All right.
Is that an okay segue? I think
Sure.
it is. Yeah,
I think
okay.
it makes sense. So my name is completely made up, but I did not make it up. My, I don't know, sixth great-grandfather was emigrating here from what I believe to be Russia, but my father has recently said Romania. I've learned a lot of things recently. And was trying to bring in some sort of sewing machine to Ellis Island, and they called him machinist. So while I was discussing this with my dad recently, as I've been disseminating false information about my name for years, I said, and Dad, it's so upsetting that nobody remembers what our name used to be. You know, you always say that drunk uncle, he forgot. And my dad's like, oh no, we know what it is. And I was like, what? Like, how for almost 40 years have you not told me this? So evidently our name was Stiefelmann, which means like steeple man person. I don't really know. But yes, I guess I'm originally a Romanian Jew who got renamed. Okay, so what does a literary agent do? I do think of myself as more than a middle woman, but all right. So I think that as publishers have consolidated and as everybody has less time to do things, kind of the primary role for a literary agent today, particularly with a debut novelist or a journalist just starting out, is discovery. So we are sort of the first step to getting looked at by a publisher. So I would say that my perhaps not primary role, but a really significant role that I value the most is the sort of treasure hunt / taste making part of it. So once I do that, let's use the case of a debut novel because I primarily sell fiction, although I do other things as well. I then feel as though, sorry, Dawn, I have to get it into the best editorial shape possible because it's my experience that people don't want to take risks on things where they can't see what something will ultimately be. Yes, there are plenty of editors who edit a lot, but they want to see what its potential is. So I usually work with an author to edit their book to get it in the best shape to be sold. And then a next key part of my role is that I have to know all of the players at the various houses. So it's not important, or I should say, it's important to know more than just so-and-so edited The Vacationers at Riverhead, but I need to know that that same editor had a dog who died 3 years ago and was really in crisis about it, and like right now isn't ready to receive a dead dog manuscript, but maybe in 2 years when she's recovered from the trauma of that. And so then once I've sold it, my next job is, of course, to not sold it once I've gotten the interest is to get the best possible price for that book. And then to make sure that we're not just selling it to a publisher, but that we're exploiting, that's the term, but it sounds gross, but it's not, all of the various rights out of it. So I want to make sure that we've sold foreign rights properly, that I've set it up well to be sold for film and television. Today, podcasting rights may come out of it. You may want to retain rights to sell for serial. Like a good agent is always thinking thinking about what are sort of all the tentacles where something can reach in those various different areas. And that doesn't just stop once you've sold a book, that continues through publication and in fact after the life of the publication of the book. And then I would say that the last phase of my job is in advocacy for my clients. So I feel strongly that a good agent makes it so that the interactions of her author and editor are primarily positive, and that the difficult ones come to me. I have no trouble saying no. I'm very good at it. And I think that it allows that relationship between author and editor to stay pure so that I can take care of and unburden my author of all of the business-related parts of the job. I'm sure I've forgotten many things, but that's the gist.
So you pretty much do everything except write the book. That's what it sounds like. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
of course.
Okay. That sounds exhausting. So,
I feel energized.
yeah. So Anissa, your profile here is a little different in that you're focused on the workplace, the people who populate the workplace, and the kind of staff that the publisher has. Can you just sort of describe a little bit about, what you do, the basics, and how it fits into the scheme of publishing at a big company like Penguin Random House, which is enormous.
Yes,
Right, yes.
it's very large. I like to think of my job in 3 different spheres. One is really our hiring and our sourcing. So I oversee our internship program, and although that tends to be a little bit more on the entry-level side, I'm always looking at different organizations and how do I support hiring managers in being able to hire the best qualified candidate from entry-level all the way to executive. The other piece is our retention. So I want to make sure that when we are getting people who come in, that they're able to stay, that they feel not only valued, but that they can really bring their best selves to work and really contribute to the company in the most authentic way possible. And third, I really think about cultural change. I think diversity and inclusion work isn't something that's necessarily new. Maybe it's gotten a lot of more traction in the last couple of years, but I think part of it is really thinking strategically about diversity and inclusion, not only as part of people who come in and what they look like, but also how do we change our cultural norms in a company and an organization and an industry that hasn't necessarily been welcoming in the past or has really seen growth when it comes to underrepresented candidates.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I find that at events like these, lots of people are looking to sort of make their way or take first steps into an industry. So I just sort of wanted to go down the line and have you think back to that formative moment and time when you were starting out and you eventually sort of broke through into doing the type of thing that you wanted to do, and went from there. So Dawn, can I start with you? I'm interested in publishing starts.
Sure. So my initial start actually was on Wall Street. And I'm from California, as I mentioned, and I knew I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in college. I was not one of those people who said I always wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor. But I did know I wanted to live in New York. And the Wall Street jobs at the time recruited heavily, and they brought you to New York. And you made a pretty decent salary to be right out of college. But I also knew within 5 days that I was miserable and I wasn't cut out for the work. And then I met a publisher, long story short, and I thought, you get paid to read? I'm an only child. I'd been reading my entire life. And I was like, this just seems incredible to me. And I turned in one encounter into another and serendipitously found someone who happened to be hiring right when I was looking.
Mm-hmm. And where was that? What house was it?
So I started with a man named Andre Schifrin, who used to run a division of Pantheon, of Random House called Pantheon, an imprint within Random House called Pantheon. And he was a terrific mentor. It was a startup, so I was the 4th hire, and I got to do everything. I was his assistant, but I got to sign up books. I got to work on subsidiary rights, which Alexandra talked about, those other rights that they sell. I got to work in production. I got to work with on the press releases. I really got a 360 education, which served me well when I then went to work at Random House, at one of the big houses.
So you've already sort of, Emma, you've already described your store owner beginnings. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing beginnings and
Sure.
how that went?
Yeah. Well, so I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I always assumed really that I was a poet because, I don't know, that was how I saw myself when I was a youth. But then when I graduated and I majored in poetry at college, when you go to Oberlin, you get to do that. You do that in the new school too, I'm sure. But so I majored in poetry, but then as soon as I graduated, I was like, okay, it's time to shake off these girlish things. Now I'm a novelist. And I actually was working as an editorial assistant at a publishing house at that time, when like 10 days after I graduated from college. But my real job, as I saw it, was writing a novel. And I wrote 25 pages a week. I had it all planned out. I was so organized. I was so disciplined. And lo and behold, a few months later, I had written a novel, and I told Dawn this earlier, that so because I was a very, very privileged fool, and I'd grown up in New York City, and my father is a novelist, and I knew a million people in publishing, it was actually very easy for me to get an agent. The agent was just as young and enthusiastic and hopeful as I was, and and so she sent my book all over town. I had a meeting with Dawn Davis, which was exciting. She was very nice to me, but I got rejected by, I think at the last count it was like 100 places, which is way more places than really even exist. Like that's like getting rejected by like every single imprint at every single publisher plus every small press. Like that is, I think, the most rejections like anyone has ever gotten. But I was undeterred. I was like, okay, wait till you see my next book about a college poet. That one was also like a murder mystery. That one also did not sell. And then I was like, well, you know what people love right now are fantasy novels. Let me just take a quick whack at that. And that also no one wanted to buy. And then after that, I went to graduate school, which helped. It helped really, I think, because it slowed me down and it forced me to focus not on like my like kooky big idea, but actually the sentences, which it turns out are like what editors like more. So after that, I started publishing some short stories here and there, and then a very, very, very one-person small press approached me about publishing a collection of my short stories. He said, do you have a collection of short stories? And I said, I can. And I put one together very quickly. And then, when that book came out, my short story collection came out, I was working at Book Court. And so the press printed 2,000 copies, which seemed like more copies than I could fathom. And I sold 800 of them at Book Court. My bosses were so supportive of me and so kind. Around Christmas, they let me put the book on a stand right next to me so I could really easily pressure people into buying it. And that's really, I mean, that to me, like the reason I think that everyone who wants to be a writer should work in a bookstore, and in New York City in particular, not only because you are surrounded by books and you know everything about what's coming out and like what is exciting and fun, but also because in New York City, you literally meet everyone. You meet the cool editors and you meet the cool agents, and everyone is in the bookstore all the time. And so working at Book Court, I met everyone. And by the time I had another novel that was ready to sell, finally, I was ready, the book was ready, and I had all of these connections. And so finally, one of the editors who had written me 3 previous rejection letters bought my first novel, and whew, did it feel good.
The rest is history.
And the rest is
Yeah. So that's your persistence story. In case we don't get another one later, you should.
Exactly.
There it is.
Oh, thank you.
I do want to address a little bit of the poetry bashing in the beginning. So
No, I mean, I wasn't a
I'm
great
just
poet. Okay, we can talk about poetry later.
yeah. I always tell students of journalism that my study of poetry helped me be a better journalist. So,
Sure.
but I won't. This is not about me. So, your beginnings.
So my beginnings speak to why I'm really glad that you have your job too, because they are also somewhat nepotistic. So I was with my parents and got invited. I don't even know how we ended up at this party. And I walked into this man's house, and I'm not, this might just be my fantasy. I don't know that this happened, but at the time I was a teenager, I was like, I think that there's a Calder mobile in this vestibule, like in his actual apartment. And I turned to my dad and I was like, what does this guy do? And my dad said, oh, he's a literary agent. I said, what's a literary agent? And my dad explained it to me, and I was like, wait a second. You get to read books, talk, and be rich? Like, this is the job for me. Like, this is all I'm interested in. Like, I'd read a book every day my whole life, but I'm not an introvert, and I thought editing was boring, sorry. Because, like, I only wanted to read a book 1 or 2 times, not like 11 times. Anyway, so many years later, I found out that most agents are not rich. It's still fine and a worthy profession. But I emailed that agent starting when I was, actually, I think I wrote him a letter because this was like 1996. There was no email. I wrote him a letter. And I was like, hi, I'm Alexandra Machinist, and I've read so many books. Like, I read through all the books at the public library, and I really think I have a lot to offer you. And he was like, okay, whatever. So I wrote him a bunch of letters, and then the summer when after my freshman year of college, I went to Michigan, and we had this really cool thing in Michigan where like school ended at the end of April, so you had sort of a 4-month summer. I don't think anybody else really has this. So starting in probably February, I picked up my letter campaign. In fact, thank God my parents didn't know. It was really mortifying. And at some point, the head of HR, this is at Janko Nesbitt, said to me, well, we've just had 3 assistants quit, and you clearly have an interest. We don't know if you have an aptitude, so we'll hire you as an intern. And I worked there every summer through college then. It was an incredible place to work. And they offered me a job as an assistant for when I graduated. And I got really scared and went to law school. So that's what happened before I went back. But yeah, that is my origin story.
Excellent. Thank you. Nisa?
Yeah, so mine is a little bit much like Dawn's. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I come from a first-generation Dominican household, so I had 3 options. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or CEO of a company. I don't know how my mom thought that I would be able to do that, but I was the first one in my family to actually graduate high school and go on to college. So part of why I wasn't sure what to do was I didn't know what options I did have. So when I went into college, I knew that I was passionate about helping people. And so a lot of my work and my background started in nonprofit and case management. And I knew that I was passionate about young people. So a lot of my work was in higher education and nonprofits that supported the professional development of young people. And part of that work, while I loved it, it felt a little bit like I was just, I don't know what the metaphor is, but like picking the baby from the river, or whatever the euphemism is.
That sounds important.
Yeah, that is important. But I wanted to stop the babies from being put in the river in the first place. So I wanted to go way above when they were being dropped into the river. And so I transitioned into an organization called the Posse Foundation, where I was supporting young people to get placed into about 15 to 20 corporate and government top companies. And they range across industries, and one of the companies was Penguin Random House. And so I realized that while I believed in the work that all these nonprofits in higher education were doing, I really wanted to change systems. I'm a big systems nerd and believing in how do we break down institutions and the cultural norms that they have. I really wanted to go within a system and work from the inside out. And that's why when the diversity and inclusion role was created, it felt like a real fit, even though I think if you ask, I do something different every single day. So if I had a moment, I don't know if I had a moment that I said, yes, this is it. But being in it really feels like this is where I'm supposed to be.
So just so, in case you don't feel like you know everybody well enough yet, I have a little bit of an Oprah question for everybody. And it's the basic form is, what's your current favorite book? What book are you into right now that's interesting you? But underlying that, what did you have an experience with a book in particular in the past that really sort of changed you or cemented your determination to sort of do this type of thing? Dawn? I know this is
Well, the
it
dirty
could be politically.
No.
Okay.
But the secret about our professions is we talked about our love of reading. But the truth is, it's very hard to read books that we're not working on. We have to be, as you said, something like reading a book 11 times. If I'm editing a book, I sometimes do read it. Well, I never read it less than 4 times. I often read it about 7 times. So it makes it hard to actually read other books.
I understand that, yes.
I
have
used
that
to be
problem.
able to say, like, every winter break, I'm going in, I would just take, and get through as many books as I could. I loved The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. It's fantastic. I really loved it. I love Normal People by Sally Rooney. Bad Blood, fantastic. Nonfiction. Didn't think I would like it. I joined my first book group last year because it was always such a burden. I would, I barely get to read for myself, and then someone else would pick it. I just thought that just sounds like a disaster. But I actually have enjoyed this particular group, and it's been really fun, and it's getting me outside of my own desk. The book that changed, that was really pivotal for me, so I worked at Vintage, which is part of the Knopf Group, and they're really a beautiful publisher. They publish everyone from Morrison to Baldwin to, just Marquez, you name it, Atwood, well, Doubleday, fantastic. And I left. It was a hard group to leave because the publishing standards are so high, and I went to take over an imprint called Amistad. And I would say maybe within 2-3 years of being there, I got a manuscript in on submission, which submission is when someone like Alexandra sends to editors. We get it. It's on, often across town, and sometimes you're the only one. That's called an exclusive. And I had an exclusive with this book called The Known World by a writer named Edward P. Jones. And that book went on to win many prizes, including the Pulitzer. But that moment with that book, I had a mission to publish it in a way as if I were at Knopf. I knew right away that it was a classic, and I wanted to publish it as if it were a classic. And I had an all-female, all primarily African-American team with me, and we wanted to kind of publish it in a distinct way to leave a mark. Not only, the book was going to leave its own mark, but to show what this all-female team could do. And we published the hell out of it. It was like a game changer for me, and really fun.
So it wasn't just you were reading it, you were making it happen as well.
I was publishing
tremendous.
it
Yeah.
and working with all of my colleagues. Alexandra talked about my job. So when I acquire a book, I sign it up. I give her the money that she, by hook or by crook, gets out of me. My job is to not only work with the text, but then to be the internal champion to the first people that I publish to are my team members, my sales force, my marketing team, my publicity team, and getting the internal enthusiasm as high as I can get it. Because remember, the sales team at a Random House or at a Simon & Schuster, they're reading thousands of books every year. So how do you kind of break through the noise to say, this is the one, I want you to do flips all over town about this book. I want you to call the booksellers and say, put everything down and read this book. So the internal championing, that starts internally, and then I continue to do it outside. We get blurbs. We send it to the New York Times and the Washington Post and try to get a story at the Wall Street Journal. Like, we are doing the work of creating excitement around a particular book. So, yeah.
Emma,
Yeah, I'm just thinking
it's
about.
a kind of an unfair question, so you're allowed to sort of just randomly pick one.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, one of the things that's really fun about being a bookseller is that you get to be really bossy. People want you to be really bossy. People walk in, and sure, I would say, like, maybe 50% of the time people walk into a bookstore, maybe 25% of the time people walk in and they're like, I am looking for a copy of The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. But most of the time, they're just walking in and wandering around. And sometimes they like send up a little flare and ask for help, but sometimes not even. And it's the bookseller's job to sort of sidle up next to them and say, like, what do you like? What are you looking for? And then they'll tell you, they'll say, oh, I'm going to visit my mother in Kalamazoo and I have to bring her something, and she loves dogs but hates dragons, or whatever, or it's an 11-year-old who thinks that Harry Potter is too scary but like maybe is interested in magic things otherwise, or whatever. People come in and give you these weird individual math problems, and it's your job to say, like today I was talking to someone and I was like, oh, you need a visit from the Goon Squad. Like, it was just so clear to me. And then you walk over and you find it and you put it in their hands and they thank you and they pay you, and then hopefully they come back in a week or a month and say, like, that was amazing. Or sometimes they say, you know what, I see what you liked about it, but I didn't love it. But then they trust you, and because they know that you're not just like gonna fill them with garbage, that you're making like thoughtful recommendations. This is not answering your question.
Not at all, but it's really interesting. Yeah. It sounds like the relationship I have with the guy at the wine store.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess the way that I'm trying to answer your question is that the most fun thing, like, often at the bookstore, I'm in our office and I'm like answering emails on my computer, but the really fun part about being in the bookstore is being on the floor and talking to whoever walks in about whatever they need, because it's always an opportunity to give someone a book that changes everything, especially when it's kids. When it's kids, that's the best. Okay, I'll stop now.
Okay, so you avoided it successfully. That was very interesting.
I guess I'll try to
You're
answer the
allowed
question.
to pick a book that you're also.
I'm not going to pick one book.
Oh,
How can we
okay.
pick one book? We're all like mega readers. You can't pick
Okay.
one book. That's like owning one pair of shoes. It's like not a thing that would happen. So
I said
think
it was unfair. So.
I know, and I appreciate it. I think the thing for me that's kind of the most profound about books is the comfort they can provide, or the escape that they can provide, and the alignment of the book to the mood. So I have thousands of favorite books, but I'll just tell you some things that I've read in the last few years that I've really liked and that have really resonated. Dawn, I have the same problem of trying to find time to read, so I listen a lot now. I would say that I listen for pleasure more than I read for pleasure. I started walking to work a few years ago, and so that gives me like 40 minutes of really good listening time, admittedly on like 1.5 speed, so sometimes I'm like, what did he say? It's like chipmunking in my ear. But it's made a really big difference. The novel that I have loved the most of the last 3 years has not gotten like a tenth of the attention that it should have, and it's a book called The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kaddish that I'm a huge sucker, nice Jewish girl that I am, for books that touch on Jewish history, but this one is particularly potent in its exploration of feminism and what it meant to be a woman who would have otherwise been really subjugated in this particular context. I'm not going to give away more than that because I really think you should read it. A really wonderful thing that happened with the book is that I read a book last year that made me weep. I loved it so much, like actually on an airplane, and the guy sitting next to me kept offering me tissues and like thought I was going through a terrible breakup. And I was like, no, it's the literature. And it was a poetry book, and that author is now a client of mine. She'd already written it and came to me afterwards, so it was really exciting. It's The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and if you don't read teen fiction, change that because it's incredible, and don't be discriminatory against the youthful writing. But I think back to so many different things. Like I remember when I was in college, and then I will stop talking about this, but I vividly remember this experience going to Borders. Yeah, I mean Ann Arbor, Borders, it was a thing. And they had all of these amazing tables, and there was a book on this table. It was like paperback pink cover of it called Tipping the Velvet. And I was like, that's a real porny title. I think I like this book. But it was the first book that I'd ever read where I read like explicit lesbian sex, and I thought, well, this is really cool. Like, I didn't know anything about this, and now I know. And I think that that's what makes me have favorite books, that I can have a transportive experience every time. And my last note on the subject is that I do not finish books that don't transport me anymore. In fact, I don't even really keep going past page 30 or 40. Like, I know the feeling I'm looking for. It is a literal feeling state. And if I don't experience that, then I'm moving on. So I half answered your question.
Yeah, that was excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question either.
Okay, you're allowed to pass as well.
Well, I won't pass just because the Poet X literally changed, like, and this was so recent, and I gave it to my sister, and my sister started sobbing on the phone. Like, I've never read a book that so explicitly describes our parents and my mom and what that was like. So loved the Poet X. Also, I have a 2-year-old, so I'm immersed in Grandma's Purse and all the baby's first words and all these different. So I don't know if I could pick one favorite or one book that moved me. I think part of what I'm also working on is really shifting the narrative when it comes to my family and books. I think we didn't necessarily grow up with tons of books in our household. The book we had was the Bible, and I'm trying to, motivate my parents, especially my mom, to especially in Spanish, reading other books outside of that. But I think my other note that's not answering your question either is that I think part of when I was kind of going through my journey of what I wanted to do, I never thought that even publishing existed. So the fact that, and I was always like, I'm never gonna work for a corporate company. I will never sell my soul in that way. And then I found that publishing exists, and I was like, oh my gosh, the product is books. I believe in this. And so part of, I think, maybe not a book that moves me into where I am now, but just the idea that I get to work for a company that produces all these different amazing books is something that's also profound. And so I can't pick one favorite book. I can pick the journey of coming here.
That's fine.
I didn't realize it was such a controversial question.
Yeah,
I thought it was just say, what are you reading now?
It was the time filler, yeah. But no, that was great. We got a lot from that. We're actually getting pretty close to taking questions from the audience, but I want to get a little practical stuff in here because I imagine that most of you are here because you're thinking about entering this industry in some way, and it's probably a lot of different thoughts about what you might do and people with different profiles. So I just want to kind of throw out broadly, one thing I noticed, I've worked at the Times for a little bit more than 20 years now, is the immense change in the number and type of important jobs that exist there. When I started, it was there was your editor, your reporter, your person who carried things around the newsroom, and the press people. But now the publishing industry and the technology behind it is so much more diverse. So I just want to generally ask you, someone looking to come into your field of work, what types of things are there available to them now that might not have been there 5 or 10 years ago, or they might not even know about? I'll start with you again, Dawn, because you're closest. And
So the obvious ones are, and we're often the public-facing being the editor, the acquiring editor, but social media, marketing for social media, people who work with sales and expanding, doing kind of special sales, so we're not just selling in the traditional bookstores. Bookstores are obviously amazing, but how do we find more customers? And sometimes that might be, at Anthropology, or so special sales, I think, is an area, and digital marketing increasingly is important for obvious ones.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, we get, resumes all the time from people who either love books or, have experience working in bookstores or other kind of retail things. But what I love the most is when someone comes to us and says, like, here's a thing that you're not doing that I think you should be doing. Like, I think that, like, when we started hiring, we had, except for my years as a bookseller, we had no experience running a business or anything, and so we were really going into it totally blind. And it's kind of miraculous that it turned into an actual place that people can come to. But this one woman, we were interviewing for an events job, and we were interviewing her, and she was really smart, but we sort of weren't connecting. And then afterwards, she sent us an email that was like, you don't understand what I actually want to do for your store, but you really need it. And she explained everything that she could do for us. And we read that email and we were like, oh my God, like, how do we not have her, like, inside our brains right now? And, like, that was 2.5 years ago, and she is still the person who I feel that way about. Like, I'm like, if she ever abandons us, I will, like, throw myself on the floor and weep for a year. Because she was able to identify things that we hadn't identified yet, needs that we had and would have. So I feel like, and that's like, I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm not young anymore either. And I think that it's, in sort of old-fashioned systems like publishing, it is so important for young people to explain to us old people, like, what we're missing and what we should be doing and we should be paying attention to.
Absolutely.
I agree. It's a little harder for me to answer because, like, I'm a book agent. We do book agent things. There aren't that many sort of ways to expand upon that. But the way in which I do think there's room for expansion is that, 20 years ago, literary agents were almost all generalists, and now people are more specialists, which I'm not sure that I think is the best way either. But what I do think is relevant is that people are seeing paths to representing lots of different kinds of books which they didn't see before. So graphic novels or certain kinds of genre fiction are really underrepresented. And then I would say the one real area of growth that we're seeing in entertainment as a whole is in podcasting. Whether or not that will ultimately be profitable remains to be seen. Like, I don't think we know yet. But I guess if I would give anybody advice, think about the form of IP that I'm too old to know about, right? Like, I found out about TikTok when I read about it in the New York Times, and I was like, I'm such a loser. It's like I also found out about juuling when I read about it in Gia Tolentino's article in the New Yorker, and I was like, great, when I don't even know what the bad thing is until I read about it in the New Yorker, I'm definitely old. But in all seriousness, like, don't jewel, but think about That was not my suggestion. But what are the things that you see as the emerging media that frankly we're not even aware of? Those are the ways that I think you'll have a better chance of finding new artists and creators and representing them and getting and disseminating their material in the
Can I
world.
actually just piggyback on that? I was slightly out of turn, but audiobooks are another big growth area for us. I'm sure you've read it in the New York Times. That is the single most, it's the growth engine of our industry. So, engineers, audio engineers, I mean, those are the departments that are hiring and expanding. Because, to your point, what do you listen or how do you get your entertainment? There are probably opportunities there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was also going to mention that we have a whole division dedicated just to audio when before it was just a publishing house that had a division. I think especially within our HR department and us seeing so many candidates, I think echo all these areas of growth and how to be successful in understanding what's emerging. I think the other piece is being able to just more concretely, being able to speak about your transferable skills. I think I was amazed coming into this industry that I feel like I say this all the time, but there really is a place for everyone, no matter what major or no matter what function you're interested in. And it's really about how do you communicate and connect the dots for those who are reading, for example, your resume or your cover letter. Being able to speak clearly about how, again, kind of to all of your point, what you can offer and what you can bring, even if it's different, is really important. Another key thing is just being very self-aware. I think part of the things that, and this was one of the questions, was how important it is for you to know an imprint and understand and research that. While I think part of my work is really moving away from just hiring people on what they know of that imprint, obviously I think it's really, really important for you to know what books are being published and how that work is being done, but also being very, very clear about what you can offer that's different, and how can you make an ask that's different. I think the other piece is for folks to be very self-aware about what you might not know. I think oftentimes, especially in interviews, we think we have to, present this very, very polished image. But oftentimes, especially when I'm, interviewing for interns or even just talking to hiring managers, it's also being really clear and being aware of the things that you might need to grow from. I would rather hire someone who's willing to Google and search as much as possible about something than somebody who is so confident in that skill that they're like, I can do this with my eyes closed. Well, that's also clearly important. I don't want anybody to walk away and start talking in interviews about things that they lack. But I think it's important to be able to say that in an interview and say, you know what, I'm really, really great at this. I know that I can be better at this, but what I'm offering is the fact that I can be able to, I'm hungry and I want it, and this is how much I want it, and that's really important.
Can I just, before we turn to questions, since you kind of have a special expertise in this, in that you have a early career program at Random House, Penguin Random House, and diversity initiatives as well. Can you just talk a little bit about how those work in relation to this other stuff that you're talking about more broadly?
So our internship program is actually not just for college students. You don't need a degree to apply to our internship program. We get interns summer, spring, fall. Spring and fall, they're about 14 hours a week. So if you're still in school or if you have another job, you're still able to do that part-time. And over the summer, it's 28 hours a week. So Monday through Thursday, typical 9 to 5. But we really try to be flexible, again, for those folks who may be out of, are transitioning or are out of college, or even, again, for many of our entry-level positions, you don't even need a bachelor's. We will, if you're hired, we will even pay for your bachelor's degree. So we're trying to support folks coming in from all walks of life to be successful in the industry. But our internship program is kind of a pipeline that we've been really working on. And part of it is also not only getting you in the door and being able to work within one department or function, but it's also providing opportunities for you to learn about different departments. So for the spring and fall, we do both a panel, so we'll have employees from across the company talk about their jobs and help you network. But we also do a number of couples in conversation with HR to get you exposure. Over the summer, our CEO always does lunch with all of our interns and talks about her career, and you get one-on-one time. So it's really about thinking about the time that you spend with us at our company pretty holistically. And we're always, again, really looking for anyone. It's not, you don't have to major in English to be able to intern. We have a number of different departments, all the way from IT. There's a lot, data scientists, IT, like nobody's like, what, publishing? I'm like, yes, please come to us. We want to hire you. So there really is a space for any interest.
Great. And I would assume that there are other publishing houses and lots of companies, media companies have these kind of initiatives. So it's worth it to take the extra look past the webpage and the profile of the company to see where these things exist, because
Clearly I'm biased because I work for PRH, but please do your research.
right, but you
Simon
didn't
Schuster has an
invent it.
internship program.
Okay, right. You didn't invent a diversity and inclusion program. So I guess we'll end on that, and we'll take some questions from the audience.
We were taught that there is really only 7 plots and 57 subplots. And then Shakespeare said there's nothing new under the sun. And I heard also that there's about 25,000 new publications a year. I might be off a little bit. But when you talked about the number of books and manuscripts that come in, the overwhelming amount of material you have to weed through, is it true that there are only 7 plots and 57 subplots? And how does that affect the fact that, how do you get something new?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no, it's not true.
No.
Well, maybe the agent or the editor could speak to that, because I don't know. It's things that capture your attention from the very first moment that don't seem like they're repetitions of a formula.
I think that's actually a really good question. I think what we're looking for is not just plot, but voice, how it's told, the relationships between the characters, and how a book makes you feel. I think you invoke that. And first of all, we know that that's very subjective. And so there's no right answer, like what I love, she may not love. We may both love it. So we're really looking for how a book makes us feel. We're looking for voice. We're looking for setting. I agree that there are a lot of books about secrets. All novels, there are secrets. And there's a lot of two sisters go to a cottage house and they, but
I still like them though.
yeah, exactly. And so we're looking for voice, we're looking for setting, we're looking for how a book makes us feel, and we'll know it when we see it. And again, we have to, after we acquire it, we become the salesperson. So my job is to make you feel like this is the plot you have never seen before, even if to some degree there are elements of it that may feel familiar.
Can I say one thing about that too? So I think that with all due respect, it's not about if the plot is the same. In fact, there are probably 3 melodies in love songs, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't thousands upon thousands of them. So at our Seder last year, my obnoxious cousin came up and said to me, I represent Crazy Rich Asians. So he said to me, I don't really understand why that movie was so successful. It's just a rom-com. And I'm like, yes, but that's exactly the point. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly the point to the plot point. It is just a rom-com. But it is just a rom-com with a cast nobody has ever seen. And there will, in a few years, be a different just a rom-com with a cast that nobody has ever seen. Or the 2 subjects of the love story will not look like anything that people have traditionally fathomed. So in fact, I think what is a great book is one that comes close to the bounds of familiarity, right? Like it makes you feel as though you understand where it's going, and then it tricks you just a little bit and moves away to the side. Mm-hmm. So I think that if there were 3 plots in the world, there would still be thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations of how you could make that plot original and special.
I changed my answer to their answers.
Yeah, that was really good. I agree with that as well. Let's go over to the East.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Spearman. I'm actually writing my first book right now. It's a hybrid of a cookbook and a compilation of short stories from women specifically. I don't know if any of you have any experience with cookbooks, but I feel like this process has been a little bit different from writing a typical novel, even though I haven't written one, but I can just assume. So my question to you all is, what would be your advice? What do you look for if you have, worked on cookbooks? What draws you in? What makes something stand out? What can make it different than the rest?
I can answer this question I don't represent cookbooks, but I have a colleague who does, and she's really good at it and tells me a lot. I think that cookbooks are one of those spaces where the content matters only once you as a human have the platform that allows you that exposure. So this is one of those unfair moments where if your recipes are the best in the whole world, but you're not a famous chef, it's hard to get attention. So I would encourage you to do everything you can, which, by the way, in like our very democratic universe of Instagram, is a really good thing to start. So like the more that you can do to build a following on social media and to prove to the dons of the world that there's a built-in audience to buy your book, the better off you are.
Also, if you're doing sort of a hybrid thing with recipes and fiction, you should read every Laurie Colwin book ever written. She died in the 80s, maybe in the 90s, but she's fabulous, funny, smart, great, and there's recipes. You're gonna love her.
Excellent.
Hi, thank you very much for everything. It's been very validating listening to everyone. I have written a novel, and I'm now very deep in editing it. And having never published a novel before, I took to the internet to see how I was supposed to approach agents, and there were lists of 10 things you must do, 10 things you must not do, identify your genre, and for this genre, there are 4 different rules, and for this genre, there are other rules and different agents and word counts. And so a lot of it is very confusing to me. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you should not do. For example, is there a word count above which someone should not go or below which one should not go? What is the right way to sort of present a final manuscript to an agent? Or is there a right way? I mean, or is it just when I feel I've got the thing done,
I'm going to answer your question backwards, but I think it's going to be helpful. So I get probably 30 emails a day of people asking me to read their novels. So I put them all in a folder, I ignore them for about a month, and then I sift through them. I do it myself. I know a lot of agents have their assistants do it, but I'm like unwilling to miss out on my personal treasure. Her treasure may be different than mine, right? And so maybe I give 3 seconds to each one. I mean, the amount of time that I give to each one is so de minimis that, and I'm saying this not condescendingly, I'm saying this so that you understand what the uphill battle is, that I need to be captivated immediately. So I sat on a panel many, many years ago with a hilarious agent named Barbara Powell. I always need to credit her with this. And she taught everybody on this, at this conference, how to write a query letter. And she said, what you need to do in your query letter is that it's gotta be 3 paragraphs, and the first one is the hook, and the second one is the book, and the third one is the cook, and everything outside of that is irrelevant and don't do it. So make it pithy. So I agree with all of that. I would also have a final portion where you really just Hollywoodize the whole thing and say, this is Scooby-Doo meets The Stand. I mean, I have no idea what that is, but that just came up in my head at the time, right? But like really place it. Show who your comparison authors are. Show what it is that you do and personalize it to each agent. Say, Alexandra, I read Lilac Girls and it really resonated with me. I see that you care about women's stories, particularly in a historical context. My book does this, and then go from there. So that is more about the process with which you approach it than the actual manuscript itself. I would also say look for each individual agent's personal guidelines. They're different. That's annoying. It's the reality. With respect to word counts, I don't know. There are lots of rules until somebody writes a book that's good enough that it breaks it all. So I think that I would stay, if you're a novel, make it between 70 and 100,000 words, unless you're writing, George R.R. Martin, and then you get a TV show. I don't know. I can't answer that part.
Thank you.
That hook that she talked about, when I'm talking to the head of sales or the person that I get money from, I have to use a hook as well. So that is really helpful, a concise way to frame your book. And the thing you can't say, this just happened to me this week, is mine is different. I can't really put it into words. It's so different. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. The minute I hear that, I just, I'm doing my grocery list. I shut off.
Can't put it into words. It's not a good thing for a writer to say. Yeah. Next question over here.
Hi, Melissa Perez from Poe College. What would be your best advice for someone who has no idea how to get into publishing in any department? So far, I've been hearing internships, co-ops, but in your personal opinion, what is the best way to break in any level?
See, everyone's looking at me, so I'll start. I think part of what's so amazing about now is that there's Google and that there's so many different events like these and panels, and you have access to at least even just introduce yourself. I think people also underestimate the power of informational interviews. Half of the time when you go to these events, entering from a point of I really just want to learn from what you're doing is really sometimes, and being very specific. So oftentimes it's, can I hand you my card and we'll reach out and schedule coffee. If you, let's say I give you my card and, we say, you immediately have to ask, like, okay, is it okay for me to email you with 3 specific times where I just need 30 minutes of your time to learn more about these 3 things? The more specific that you are, leave no room for me to say no. I think that's oftentimes the best advice that I could give in utilizing that time. So I think informational interviews are really important. And then there's so many organizations out there that specifically tailor to publishing, Latinx in publishing, POC in publishing. There's so many opportunities like HarperCollins does, even just an info session for anybody who's interested in it. Now I'm pitching other companies, so don't tell anyone. But there's so many opportunities to even just get your foot in the door, that it's really about leveraging each of those. It's not easy. I wish it was the more democratic process. I wish I could say, everyone email me, but that doesn't necessarily happen. The more that you can be specific and don't leave room for somebody to say no to you in order to learn more, the better off I think we'll be.
I have my own blog, but while the blog is fun to do, I really want to do this as my major while also working on some various book ideas, from a poetry book, young adult book, children's book, etc. And I'm wondering, how would you try to organize that best to the end product into becoming a publisher?
I think in each time you're applying to something, being clear about why that specific function is where you want to be. And again, doing as much research as possible into the company, the imprint, if you know who the editor or the team is, putting that as much as possible into your cover letter. So part of the organizing isn't necessarily organizing your head to decide, like, this is what I want to pursue and moving forward with it. Some panelists here might have a different take on that, but being very specific and clear to the job that you're applying to. So when we're looking at resumes, I think it's very similar to the 30-second scanning. I want to know why you're interested in that particular role, so being very specific. And at PRH, you can apply to as many jobs as you want, and they could be completely different, and that's completely fine, as long as each cover letter is very specific to that job function. So I think, back to my original comment about organizing, it's not necessarily organizing and picking a path, but being very organized in when you are applying and being very specific about that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm a second-year student in New York University, and I'm wondering what are some resources, platforms, and general advice for those who want to write bilingually?
Well, I think that, there are some small presses who do works in translation, like Europa Editions does work in translation. I don't know. There's some book fairs. There's some sub-rights. We haven't really spoken about sub-rights, so that's when we sell maybe the foreign rights, or we sell it to Book of the Month Club, or we sell First Serial to a magazine. And if you can read a different language, you can be helpful. Also, even in editorial, there are some imprints that publish works in translation. They tend to be with the smaller publishing houses and not the big five because they're not as profitable or they're not as commercial, shall we say. So there are opportunities, but we tend to export more. So we sell our English language, American originated content overseas more than we bring in books, although there are exceptions like the Swedish, Scandinavian crime novels. Some obvious big ones have been really super successful, but
Yeah. And I'm just thinking also in terms of books that we carry in the store that are bilingual in terms of having two languages within a book. There are a lot of poetry books that are bilingual right now. I feel like that's the genre in which I feel the most aware of people not only including two languages in a book, but being really excited about it, and that there's sort of a community of people who are really excited about it. So I feel like that's where it's happening, at least at Books Are Magic.
And if the question, sorry,
No.
and if the question is more about how to possibly do it, there's an organization called Conscious Language. I'm forgetting the name of the founder, but there's a number of different resources about how to necessarily, in terms of style, that might be helpful.
Yeah. There are also, there's a Center for Translation. Again, the name escapes me. That might be the official name, which you can look up. The other thing I'll add, since I work at a newspaper, is that to get into this, it might be more practical to do short form things like try to find media news publications that need translation and do short takes, try to get into it in that way rather than books which are years-long projects. So. Okay.
Hi, my name's Alyssa. I'm a literary studies student here at the New School. This is a question for you, Alexandra. You had mentioned that you had gone to law school, and I was wondering if you found that helpful in your job as an agent, especially because you mentioned the negotiating subsidiary rights for your clients.
So when I started law school, the dean of the law school at the time said to us in this speech on the first day, "Going to law school at the University of Virginia will change how you think." And I thought, what kind of BS is that? It's not going to change how I think. It totally did. It was a formative experience in changing how I think. Do I use it? Yes, but in that way that it's changed how I think. Do I think you need it to be a good agent? No, not at all. And in fact, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's worth it. I really fear the cost of law school and other forms of higher education that you don't directly use. And so I would never encourage somebody, unless they had a way to go fully funded or that they just wanted to go for the lark of it, to take on the kind of debt that law school obligates you to then go into a job in publishing, which isn't exactly flowing with the cash. So that's my theory on that subject.
Thank you.
The big houses do have internal counsel. We have general counsel. We sometimes they'll read a manuscript with you if you know that you need a legal read. So there are other ways that you can use your law degree and still work in publishing. And also some of these big companies, like HarperCollins is owned by News Corp. Simon & Schuster at the moment is owned by CBS. Sometimes our lawyers go between the media companies. So at one point, our attorney had come from CBS. I remember when I worked at HarperCollins, the attorney came from Wall Street Journal and then went back. So there is some fluidity there.
Hi. So I had a question regarding two-parter. Audio engineering and audiobooks. Why is that becoming so popular? I'm a big fan myself, but I mean, I have my reason for why I think it's so popular. I'd really love to hear from the professionals. And two, I'm thinking of a book idea. It involves, it will involve music. And I'm thinking in a digital medium, maybe I can find a way to sell music that's associated with what's going on in the book. And I thought that might be something I'd throw by you to see if there's any outlet for digital content where you can actually buy, say, art or music or anything associated with the book as someone's reading it. That's how my mind works.
So go invent that thing. That sounds really that sounds really great. I think that just the first part of your question, and others can take this, but I think because the delivery, it's so easy. We all have these computers in our pocket that we call phones, and you can download an audiobook in 20 seconds. And we're using them everywhere. It used to be you had to have it in your car, your CD, this, that, and the other, and they were so bulky. Now it's so easy. And I think they're doing some really great audiobooks. I mean, the George Sanders, Lincoln in the Bardo, I don't know if everyone's like, you've got to listen to that. It becomes an event, almost like a cross between reading and theater in a way. So I think the delivery is easy and the product is becoming more interesting. Yeah.
Also, just for any of you who listen to audiobooks but do not love Amazon. So Amazon owns Audible, which is obviously like a huge audiobook company, but there's an audiobook company called Libro FM that partners with independent bookstores, and you can get all the same audiobooks from them, and your money does not go to Jeff Bezos. And if you want, you can buy it just through Libro FM, no questions asked, or you can also look on their website for a specific independent bookstore, and you can link your account. So for example, let's say you looked up Books Are Magic, and you were like, they are my bookstore. That's my bookstore that I love, that I want to support. Every time you order an audiobook, it goes through us, which means we get like a nickel or something. It's not a giant amount of money, but it does add up. And they are really cool, and you should all get the Libro FM thing. The end.
I will add that I have actually had that idea about writing a novel where the song plays behind the passage that you're reading. But you should do it first, because I don't have time. Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I love it. So,
Hi, my name is Taylor. I'm going to finish my MFA in May. I'm actually in Sigrid's fiction class, which she'll be very pleased to hear that you guys loved her novel so much. And I am wondering if you have any advice for writers who may be discouraged by the amount of competition for all the same, entry-level positions or the same internships, and just people who are still on fire to learn and get into this industry, but who are being discouraged because there are so many people also trying to do the same thing you are.
So wait, are you a novelist and you want to work in publishing?
Yes.
Did I understand that right? Okay.
Toni Morrison did it, right?
She did.
A lot of people do it. I mean, I think, yeah. It's hard. I mean, I think that, with anything in this field, there is so much rejection. Whether you're applying for jobs or you're sending your manuscript to agents or your agent is submitting your novel to editors, there is so much rejection. And I think that, you just have to be persistent, and you just have to believe. You have to know, this is what I want to do. I want to be a novelist, editor, powerhouse, and just keep trying. I mean, it's, I don't know, maybe you have better ideas about how to apply for jobs, but yeah, I mean, I feel like, your advice about being specific is so good. And I know, I mean, I'm our HR department at the bookstore, and I mean, when I read someone's cover, I don't care about anyone's resume. What I care about is the cover letter. And I don't know if that's good advice.
No, we read every
or
single
bad
cover
advice.
letter.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah.
Every single one. So make
Yeah.
sure if you're applying to more, you edit every cover letter.
Yeah.
I think part of what I think your question is a two-parter. So how do you remain persistent? And I think what's really big, and I think people don't necessarily say enough, is like build your own community, especially when, and this is regardless if you're trying to get into publishing or any other job. Build a community of people who will support you and be able to be there when it, frankly, it does suck to get so many rejections and what that's like. So definitely build a community of people who will support you, who will help you, who would read your cover letter multiple times and make edits. The other piece is, again, I think I can't stress this enough, being very specific, being clear about your transferable skills, and how, again, in a world where everyone's getting an MFA, what about your experience translates to that job, and what makes it different? I'm not saying go out there and find something niche about your life, but I mean, I'm a big promoter of like really using your whole self. What is it about not only your degree, but your life experiences and all the things that make you really make you effective in this particular job and what that's like. So I think building a community and being as specific as possible usually helps.
Just also a note on being specific. It also applies to the aspiring writers in the room. When people come up to me and say, you know, I want to work on your list because I have admired X, Y, and Z book, it tells me something that they've done their research, that they're being specific, that they're making a connection with this kind of book. If you're trying to sell a book, find an agent, I think Alexandra alluded to this earlier, someone did, you know, I loved what you did with Crazy Rich Asians, and this is a similar, this is gonna do for that this community what Crazy Rich Asians did for that community, or I love what you did with how you represent a lot of debut fiction. I think if you're very specific, it gives us a little bit more time to linger on the page, to think about that person. I don't have an opening now, but I remember this person actually remembered the first, you know, big history book I published. So I think being specific can be helpful.
And I have one specific resource. Does everybody know about Publishers Marketplace? I think if you don't, it's a really, really useful resource. It has job postings. It lists all the deals that people do. I think you have to pay for it. I don't know how much it costs, but I think it's not a lot of money, and it just familiarizes you with the whole industry, and you can see smaller jobs that aren't from PRH necessarily. A lot of people start at smaller agencies and go from there to bigger companies, and I think that's a pretty effective way to get into it.
And promise, last thing, to Dawn's point about being specific, it's also like thank you notes. If I can't also stress this enough,
God, yes.
even if you're rejected, write a thank you note and even ask for feedback. Hey, you know, thank you so much for the opportunity. Is there anything that I should know or do better? I can't grant you that we're going to respond every single time, but you following up and being willing to ask for what could I do better, again, will help with folks to remember, like, maybe this opening, no, but next time that I have another opening, this person I will think about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you guys so much.
I've been told we have 2 more questions that we can take, so.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Brooke Suffren. I have a similar question, but also kind of different, so I hope you'll be able to answer it. I am a current student at Pace University. I'm a former PRH intern, and I'm currently interning at Viacom. So my question is if you have any advice for someone who is ultimately looking to transition from an intern to an entry-level position in publishing. But specifically, I'm interested in the marketing, subsidiary rights areas of publishing. So I've gotten a chance to kind of dabble within those areas so far, and frankly, I'm not too interested in editing. I'd rather read a bunch of different books than one 11 times. So if you have any advice for that, that would be greatly appreciated.
I hope that you're gonna rep PRH forever, wherever you go. Talk about how amazing our internship is. No,
It was amazing.
I told her to say that, everyone. I think, especially if you're currently interning and you've previously interned, making sure to the connections that you made in that, whether it be your previous supervisor, at the panels, like if you still have their contact information, keeping in touch is really, really important in order to not only capitalize on the experience that you've already had, but I think to Dawn's previous point, to keep you on the radar of people when they have an opening. The other piece is, again, I keep mentioning informational interviews, mentoring, being consistent with how often you keep in touch. I think part of what sometimes get lost is that, you know, you have a supervisor, you have a mentor or somebody that you really connected, and then too many months pass and you forget to keep in touch. I think I also like to use holidays as an area of, you know, it was great, this happy holidays, or this reminded me of you. Keeping in touch is really important. But really, again, I keep reiterating, being specific about the experience that you had and why that makes you the perfect candidate for that particular job. I think for marketing, for example, that's one thing where you can, being able to pick out not only the emerging things that we might not know of, but also utilizing the skills that you already have. And let's say if you had an internship in editorial, you don't think that that's what you want to do, but having that experience really lends well to why you'd be good at X, Y, and Z. So the more that you can, I feel like I keep repeating this, but the more that you can connect the dots, especially when you're interviewing, the better. I don't know if there's any additional.
Yeah, I would add also, I don't know how many directors of subsidiary rights get notes to them specifically, and that's exciting for them. So a personal note, you can Google who's the director of subsidiary rights for Simon & Schuster or for Scribner. And then you write that person a note. I've had experience. I'm not interested in editorial. I specifically am interested in subsidiary rights because I want to help expand the income or the bottom line for this particular book. And I'm passionate about reading across genres, and I know you get to do that in subsidiary rights. I think that person then takes the note to HR and says, next time we have an opening, let's bring this person in.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Deidre Tate, and I would like to know, for someone that is a new writer with a completed manuscript, how can they get on the radar of a publisher or a literary agent? What benchmarks would you be looking for that would wow you for someone that's new but has a really powerful independent project? Like as far as social media following, should you try to sell some independently? I just want to get your feedback on that.
So like I said, I'm all feelings, but it's true. I think you should wow with the material you have on the page, and you should wow with really being the most you can be. I would say for me, this is not true for everybody else. I find self-publishing to be a deterrent, not I like the idea of something that's completely fresh. That's a lot easier to sell than something that has a track record that could be a little bit I would also say that in fiction, I kind of don't care about your social media following. I think that unless your social media following is so enormous, like over 100,000 followers, like it's nice and it's additive, but it's not meaningful. Like I've taken people out of the slush pile who have done nothing to wow me other than write a terrific book, and I have to go back to that over and over again and say, like, your job is to write the best book possible and to craft your cover letter such that I will recognize it to be that way.
I would just add, I'm like the I would just add girl. I would just add.
But you're so good at it.
Yeah. So that's true for fiction. I totally agree. I don't want to know, it doesn't matter really what your social media platform is for fiction. It's about voice, it's about your skill level and your plot, and can you really bring it. For nonfiction, so just say you're the HR girl, that's your handle, right? And you give advice, and I get a proposal in, and if I get something from someone who has like 250,000 followers across different platforms, and she's been going at this for a while, and she's been on the Today Show giving career advice, I might pay attention to that if I acquire in that area. First of all, it has to be an area that I acquire in, as opposed to something that's on the page that's solid advice, looks like something I could have read in Fortune magazine, but they don't necessarily have 250,000 followers across platforms. So for publishers, platform can count. It depends on the genre, and it depends on how the other ways we're going to get the book out. We're often going to rely on narrative nonfiction or prescriptive nonfiction. We're often going to rely on partnering with the author. And if the author has a social platform that has some mojo, that's a good thing for us.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that wraps everything up for the evening. Thank you to everybody. And thank you all for coming.